Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.
You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Malabama. Hello, everybody. Coming up on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about the best way to count his material possessions. And then we've got a lightning round question about other people's possessions. That's followed by our Right Here, Right Now segment and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full Maximal edition of episode 451. That's the full episode where we answer 5 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because sing along at home, y'all. Advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, we'd love to hear from you. Our phone number is 406-219-7839, or you can just email a voice recording right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Lee.
This is Lee Jones from Liverpool, England, and I'd like to know your thoughts on my approach to minimalism. I'm married, and so I consider many of the objects in our home to be ours. The TV, the sofa, the bed, and so on. There's also numerous items that I personally could live without, so I definitely consider them to be hers. My thought process about what constitutes as being my possessions is essentially, what would she pack into a box if she decided to kick me out? As things stand, that count would be at 52 items. Would you agree with this approach? Or do you feel I should also include the items that I would have if, on the flip side, she was to leave me? For clarity, we are very happily married. Thank you for taking the time to answer my question.
Lee, I'm glad you clarified that at the end of the question here. Because at first I'm like, there's
Takes
something,
all the pressure off.
There's a different question going on here, right? What am I allowed to take when we get separate? Consult your attorney for that, right? Now, TK, what I hear a couple questions here, but there's an underlying question, and that question is, what's the best way to count my material possessions?
Yeah.
The key word here in this household being my material possessions. As he said, some are our possessions, some are her possessions. Of course, it's always possessions you don't want. Those are her possessions, right? The ones that I want for myself, those are mine. And then the ones that we share and we enjoy together, those are ours. And so what are your thoughts? What's the best way to count material possessions?
Oh man, whatever way is more fun, right? Especially when there's nothing at stake. But it kind of makes me think about what's the best way to measure wealth. So some people may say, hey, it's your net worth, which is kind of like your wealth on paper, at least financially speaking. But your net worth isn't necessarily a reflection of your liquidity, right? If you need, let's say, $20,000 by the end of the week, you might have a net worth that far exceeds that, but still not be able to meet that demand. And so there are certain times where it's important to be able to think about what you have in a way that isn't just theoretical, right? And I think when it comes to possessions, I like this idea of saying, hey, what would get put in a box with my name on it? But then there's this other aspect too that's interesting to me, and it is, what are you living with now? And what's actually exerting an impact on your life? Because you could have 100 things in your home. None of them are things that you need or want. All of them would go into your wife's box, but you're living with those 100 things right now, and they are impinging upon your life right now. They are taking up space, taking up time, affecting your energy, even affecting the way you move about through your place. And so they're still yours, even if you don't possess the title deed, or even if you weren't the one who said, we have to buy this now. And so I think that's an important way to think about it. What's affecting your life? If it's affecting your life, it's yours until it stops affecting your life.
I like the way you're thinking about that, and also coupling it with the net worth thing. Let's say your net worth is $1 million, or maybe it's $10 million. Or what if your net worth is $1 billion? Who's to say whether or not that is good or bad? It's perspectival. Now, it sounds good in a vacuum. If my net worth was $1 billion and nothing else in my life changed, that'd be preferable to my net worth being $0. However, let's say that someone said, I can make your net worth $1 billion, JFM. Okay, what do I have to do to get? Oh, well, actually, you have to work 100 hours a week for the rest of your life. Oh, wait a minute. Is that something that I want? So I might be counting my money and getting more of it, or in this case, with minimalism and counting your possessions, with Lee, it might be about having fewer possessions, right? And so I wrote down something pithy here. Fewer is greater than zero. Now, let me talk about that real quick because it almost sounds incomprehensible or it almost sounds like nonsense at first. Fewer is greater than zero. What do I mean by that? Well, if we're just counting our possessions, that's not a game that I'm ever going to win, right? For me, minimalism was not about counting the possessions. In fact, early on when we started the website, and Bama, if you could put a link in the show notes to an early essay I wrote about counting all of my possessions. And I owned 288 of them. It's at theminimalists.com/288. And I owned at the time, when I first became a minimalist and got rid of 90+% of my material possessions, I owned 288 possessions, or so I said. But a lot of people didn't realize that blog post that I wrote way back in 2010, maybe 2011, 2010, it was a joke. Because when I first stumbled into minimalism, I realized there were a bunch of other people who were like counting their things. My friend Colin Wright, who was on the show recently, he owned 51 items and everything he owned fit in his backpack. And even he would say it wasn't about the number of material possessions. It was about what he was able to do by having fewer material possessions. Hence, fewer is greater than zero. It's not that he owned nothing. He owned very few things. And there were some nice things. It was fewer things so he could live the life he wanted to live. And then I saw Dave Bruno. He wrote a book called The 100 Thing Challenge. And that book actually tackled a lot of what the spirit of Lee's question is. Lee's question is, what is mine? What is ours? And when Dave did it, he didn't count his family's things. Like he didn't count his couch as mine. That's not my possession. It's our shared possession. And I realized pretty quickly you could gamify the whole counting thing in a way that if it felt like you wanted to win, well, what if I just count all the socks in my sock drawer as one item, right? Or wait, is one pair of socks 2 items? I don't know. Or is it 100 items if I pull all the different threads out and now they're useless, right? And so how you count is perspectival. What is the point of the counting? Is it just interesting because you want to take an inventory of your things? Are you trying to compete with other people? And I realized that in the minimalist space early on, there were some people who were doing it just for fun, like Colin and Dave. There were other people who were counting their 15 things they own. And then someone would one-up them the next week. I only own 14 things. Where does that terminate? Well, that ends up as the naked person screaming Tourettic remarks in the middle of the street. They own nothing, but that is not greater than owning a few things that actually add value to your life. And so getting back to your net worth analogy, what you're really talking about is what are these things doing for you? What is your net worth doing for you? Because if I just had $1 billion sitting in the bank and I didn't change anything about my life, it didn't make me more generous, it didn't improve the relationships of the people around me, or worse, maybe it actually harmed my relationships by having more money. Well, that is not a positive outcome for me.
Man, when you said, what did you say? Fewer is greater than zero?
Yes.
I thought you were about to go Terrence Howard on me and start being like, see, if you take the numbers, one of the problems I have with mathematics today is that they don't understand zero. I thought you were about to take it to that level. Okay, so you made me think of 2 things really quickly. One, there was like this social experiment where this guy was asking people, he says, if I could offer you, if I could put like $1 billion in your bank account right now, would you say yes? And they said yes. And then he says, but what if that meant tomorrow morning, you're dead? Everyone's like, no, I wouldn't take it. But you do get to be a billionaire for the rest of the day, right?
For the rest of your life.
Yeah.
For the rest of your
Your
life.
very short life.
Yeah. And it's like no one said no, right? And it just kind of makes you think about a different way of measuring what we have. You can have everything, but if you're dead inside, it doesn't do you much good. And you can have few things, but if you are alive, that means everything, right? There's this movie whose name I can't remember, but it's kind of older, but it stars Justin Timberlake, and I think it's called In Time. And
Yes, it is.
Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
The science fiction movie where you pay for things in terms of time rather than money. And
Real quick, I hate that the science fiction dystopian city in the film is called Dayton, by the way.
No way. I think it's funny, too, that it's called science fiction because it's a much more honest look at money than the way most movies depict money, because that really is what you're paying in most cases when you prioritize money. You are paying in terms of time. You're giving up life energy and time. But anyway, both that social experiment and that movie combined with what you say makes me think about another way we can measure our possessions, and that could be in terms of time. There are things that save us time. There are things that use up a lot of time. And there are things that amplify our joy in such a way that they give meaning to our time. And I think one way of measuring what we have is by asking ourselves, what are the things that give meaning to my time here on this earth? Some of those things might take up a lot of time, but that might be okay. Some of those things might save me some time, and that's a cool benefit. But what contextualizes my life in such a way, what amplifies my life in such a way that for the brief amount of time I'm here on this earth, it makes that time rich and meaningful?
You're getting down to the why, and I want to get practical with Lee in a moment, but I'd like to expand on that why first. There are a couple of whys that I'm thinking about. The first why is, why count my material possessions? And the second why is, why do I own the things that I own? The first answer is like, well, maybe it's just a fun little game. I want to count my things. That's great. And that was the essence of the 288 items. It was a joke because I realized if we're just playing the game of the fewest possessions wins, well, then I am a loser. Call me a loser. Maybe I'm a fake minimalist because I own 288 items. And when you read that, you actually figure out it's way more than 288 items because I'm counting pairs of shoes as one item. And then maybe if you look at it from a Buddhist or non-dual perspective, it's all just one item anyway. There is no two. There is no separateness in our items. And so if it's playful, if it's curious, I'm just interested in how many things I own. Over a decade ago, we found out that the average American household has more than 300,000 items in it. That's according to the Los Angeles Times. And we talked about that in our last Netflix film. Not because we wanted to go around and count other people's things, because it's staggering, which brings me to the second why. Why do I own all of these things? Well, quite often, we've amassed things over years or sometimes decades of accumulation, and we think there's going to be some bliss point. Eventually, it's going to make me happy. And so we're counting up toward happiness. And you know what? 1,000 items didn't do it. Maybe 10,000 will. Maybe 100,000 will. Maybe 300,000 will. And you become the average American household. And what happens? Wait, it didn't make me happier. In fact, many of these things are covering up that pre-existing happiness, that joy, that peace, that contentment, that tranquility, that eudaimonia that is inside me already. And so in a weird way, the things that were supposed to bring me happiness are doing the opposite. They're not doing their job. They're not bringing me the happiness. So why did I buy these things? To access something I already have going on in here. And that can be great with some material possessions. Our material possessions, as a minimalist, my material possessions enhance or augment my experience of life. And when they cease to do that, it's continuing to question those things. Why do I keep holding on to this? Am I holding on to it just in case? Am I holding on to it just for when? Is there some story that I'm telling myself about these material possessions? Now, I do want to get practical for a moment with Lee, because what he's saying here is we have a house full of stuff. Some of the things are my things. Some of the things are her things, my wife's things. And some of the things are our things. And legally, I'm sure it's different in different areas. And so I'm not going to talk about it from a legal perspective. But just from a philosophical perspective, I'd like to get your insights, TK, on maybe categorizing hers, mine, ours. What are your thoughts?
Oh, man, it's interesting because what if we thought about things in the way we think about problems, right? Imagine if I said, okay, look, me and my wife, there are some problems that I bring to the table, right? There are some difficulties she would not face in life if it wasn't for me and the way I struggle with this or that. And there are some difficulties that we create together. We experience them by virtue of us being together. Some difficulties I would be free from if I wasn't with her because they're an expression of how she struggles with life. All right, how do I count the number of problems I have? Oh man, it's all ours. It's all us, because that's the choice that we made once we decided to bind our lives together, right? And for me, I wouldn't think about things in terms of like, well, what's mine? What's yours? What wouldn't be here if you were gone? What wouldn't be here if I was gone? Because life is us and it's about what we create together. And so your problems are our problems. The problems I have that you wouldn't have if you weren't with me don't matter because you are with me. So there are problems too. All of these problems belong to us. And for me, that mindset is what puts you in a position to be able to manage, negotiate, play with the particular problems that are ours most effectively.
This is why I love having these conversations with you, because while I agree with everything you just said, I look at it from a completely different perspective. If I look at my household, all of our things are hers.
Yeah.
And in a way, what I'm really saying is I'm not attached to any of these things. I'm not attached to an outcome. And the more attachments that I form, because they happen to form naturally, because I've been acculturated by our society and peers and by the American dream, the so-called American dream, to accumulate, right? And then become attached to those accumulations. And part of status is what? Look at all of these things that I have. These are mine, and it's how successful I am. Here's how you measure my status, my success, my well-being. My net worth is determined by what? Well, for me, it's by my well-being, right? But it's not your net worth that really determines your well-being. It's your net worth that determines simply the numbers in your bank account.
Yeah.
And I'm not allergic to material possessions. I'm not allergic to money, but I do really want to scrutinize and examine and investigate any attachment I have to those things, because those attachments often start with whatever story I'm telling myself about those things. And this is why I love Lee's question. I wanted to lead with this question because he's really investigating the story that he's telling himself.
It's a fun one, yeah.
Is this my stuff? Is this my couch or is it ours? Okay, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
But maybe the question behind that is, what is my attachment to this couch? If this were to spontaneously combust right now, we go back to the spontaneous combustion rule, would I feel relief? Okay, why am I still attached to it? Or would I simply replace that thing? Oh, okay. Then yeah, it's mine in terms of functionality. I own the thing. I have the deed to the property, or I have the receipt for the material possession. But ultimately, owning a thing doesn't mean that I have to be attached to it.
Would you say that the things that are in your home that are there because of someone else, would you say they're attached to it?
It's not for me to judge, but quite possibly yes. Or it could just mean that they get benefit from it, something that I don't get benefit from.
Yeah.
You know, if my wife has a pair of high heels in our closet, I would get no value from owning them myself. Although paradoxically, I might get value if she wears them and I enjoy the way they look aesthetically, right? Yeah. And so some of the things that the other people in my home own, whether it's my daughter or my wife, yeah, I don't get direct value from them, but maybe I'm able to appreciate the indirect value I get. You can call it compersion, getting joy from someone else's joy, seeing someone else smile. Often that's contagious. Laughter is contagious. Well, why is that? It's because we enjoy the joy from someone else. And so I think that's the essence of this question, Lee. Yeah. The things that your wife might be attached to that you don't want necessarily, maybe you can find the joy that she finds in those things. Now, however, if she is really attached to some things and those things are making her miserable, the worst thing you can do is go up to her and say, you're attached to these things and you need to get rid of them. What you can do is you can get really curious about those attachments, though. Lee, I'd love to send you a copy of the Minimalist's very first book. It is called Minimalism, Live a Meaningful Life. It's our first book, came out in 2011. The second edition came out in 2015. And it really shows that minimalism is not about counting, the essence of simplicity is about living a meaningful life with less, not with zero, but with less, understanding, with fewer attachments, fewer toxic relationships, and of course, fewer material possessions. Before we get back to our callers, Alabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer the Patreon community chat's question of the week.
Yes, indeed. Now, during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, minimal maxim. You can find this episode's maxims in the show notes at theminimalists.com/podcast, and every minimal maxim ever at minimalmaxims.com. We'll also deliver our weekly show notes directly to your inbox, including 5 new maxims every Monday for free if you sign up for our email newsletter at theminimalists.email. What's the question of the week this week?
What's one thing you'd like to declutter from someone else's life?
TK, before we get to our pithy answers, let's hear how some of our listeners answered this question.
Svenja said, I'd love to help my parents declutter their house, especially my dad's old collection of broken model trains.
So that's interesting. They're broken model trains. The question is, maybe she sees some suffering in her dad's collection holding on to these things. Or maybe there's actually some joy on the other side of this. I'm holding on to these for when I have time to repair them. What did Meg have to say?
She said, I would declutter some of my mom's things, mainly home decor and craft supplies that I know I'll eventually inherit but never use. Sorry, Mom.
Preemptive strike. Huh?
Yeah.
This happens a lot at our live events. I notice I've actually been really encouraged by a lot of parents who they will show up at an event and they have their kid with them and they say, I'm getting rid of my excess stuff now so I don't have to burden my kids with it in the future. But of course, that's something that's pretty difficult to communicate to a parent is, hey, I wish you'd get rid of these things because when you're dead, I'm going to have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's what drives us to solve problems for our friends sometimes too. Like, look, I got to help you solve this problem, man, because you're killing me. Right?
Well, speaking of friends, Monica had this to say.
She said, I would declutter my friends' calendars so they'd have time for the important things.
The interesting thing about important things, right, is however you spend your time, you've identified what is important to you. Now, you might say something else is important to you, right? Like, what's really important to me is going to every single Lakers game. But if I don't go to any of them, is it actually important to me, or am I just telling myself a story about how important to me that is?
Oh, man, I disagree with you on that one because
Tell me.
I don't think that accounts for addiction or the human phenomenon of succumbing to temptation. I think we can actually fail to pursue our highest values. I think it's possible to want something, know you want it, really mean it, but fail to overcome your weaknesses, fail to win the battle for your soul, and wake up one day and realize that you spent your whole life living something that wasn't really important to you. That's what distraction is, right? We realize when it's too late. Oh man, scrolling for 2 hours felt good in the moment, but that is not what I want my life to be about. That is not how I intended to spend my day. But I lost that battle for my soul for those 2 hours.
I think I agree with you, and it's just about making a distinction. When we say the word important here, I'm thinking of priorities, which doesn't actually exist. Priority means the first thing. And so whatever you're doing right now, if it is scrolling on TikTok or it is working at a soup kitchen, or if you're driving to work, or maybe you're walking the dog, or you're washing dishes, whatever you're doing right now, that is your priority in this moment.
It's what you're choosing to prioritize.
That's right. And even if later you might regret it, or later you might realize that, I wish I wouldn't have had that priority. I call these lip service priorities, the things that we say we want to do, but we don't actually do. Like, it's great. Everyone can make a list. Anyone listening to this right now can make a list of their 10 priorities in their life. And the question is, how much time are you focusing on all of them, right? And by the way, it's really difficult to have 10 the first things. It doesn't even make sense logically. But also, if you just have a list of 10 things that are important to you, how many of those things are you actually spending time on? And then if you made that same list, you take a separate list on the same page. You draw a line right down the middle. What are the 10 things you spent the most time on today? And how much of that connects? Is it one item? Is it 2 items? Is it 10? Are all 10 there? Here, I'm really focused on these important things. Or am I forsaking the important things because of these distractions that I've put right there in front of me? Let's do one more from Jesse.
Jesse said, I don't always answer these weekly questions, but when I do, the answer has always been Legos. While I love my children and husband dearly, I won't lie about how much I'd love to see all these pieces spontaneously combust and disappear from my house.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because with my daughter, there are certainly things that she has in her room that I'm like, oh, why are you holding on to these? Why are you collecting these
Why
things?
are these in the bottom of my feet?
Yeah, the Legos thing is fascinating because then it becomes an actual hazard for you. So Jesse, I totally get where you're coming from in terms of, spraining ankles in the middle of the night because you've twisted your foot on yet again another Lego that has been left on the floor. But of course, there can be consequences for that. There are ways around that. Or of course, there can be boundaries around. Great. I really, really, really enjoy that you enjoy your Legos. Keep them in your room, please. Or keep them in this designated area, certainly not in the hallway where I'm going to step on them at 2 a.m. as I make my way to the bathroom. How about you, listeners? What's one thing you'd like to declutter from someone else's life?
And we can't let the moment pass without giving Jesse a shout out for giving us that meme. Reread that first sentence again with some appreciation. Go ahead.
I don't always answer these weekly questions, but when I do, the answer has always been Legos.
Come on. Appreciate the genius of that.
All right, let us know in the comments, what's one thing you'd like to declutter from someone else's life? Okay, give me something pithy, TK. What's one thing that you would like to declutter from someone else's life?
Well, my pithy maxim is clutter is the child of an unsure mind. You know, there are a few different types of objects we might have in our home. Some of those things are necessities. Some of those things are things that aren't necessarily life-saving or life-giving, but they are part of our routines and so on. Some things are for emergencies. But then clutter represents those things that I call unrealized aspirations. They're things we brought into our home with the intention of using them for something, a book that I intend to read someday, a coffee table that I intend to use someday, but we haven't made a commitment to them. And when we bring things into our home and we aspire to use them, but we fail to make a commitment to them, they eventually become clutter. Why? Because they're taking up space in our homes, and then they begin to produce tension and anxiety in the mind because you've got this object always speaking to you, do something with me, and the moment you make a decision, that's what makes it cease to be clutter. It's not about getting rid of it. It's about making a decision. Because if you look at that object and say, you know what? I'm going to actually use that painting. I'm going to actually read that book. I'm going to keep it, but I'm going to do with it the thing that inspired me to buy it. Now it ceases to be clutter. It becomes value creation. Or you might say, you know what? I'm just going to decide that I'm not focused on piano this season in my life, so I'm going to sell that keyboard and use the money for something else. It ceases to be clutter. Even before you get rid of it, it's the decisiveness that makes it cease to be cluttered. So for me, what I would get rid of, it would be indecisiveness. I would try to get everybody to take a look at what they have and say, man, you don't have to get rid of that, but just remember why you bought it.
That's good. I want to talk about specifically OPP, other people's possessions, right? And quite often it's really easy for us to see the fault in someone else's possessions. You've heard me in the past say that judgment is merely a mirror that reflects the insecurities of the judge. And so I might say to you, TK, you don't need that beanie that you're wearing right now. But that's simply me saying, I don't need the beanie. Oh, he took it off.
Aw, no, it's a cute beanie.
I need the beanie. No. And so, but I think the interesting thing about all of this is that it's easy for us to see the problem with someone else's possessions. And so I'm going to turn to scripture for a moment. This is from the book of Milburn.
You can't quote scripture like that. You got to be like, from the book of Milburn, chapter 5, verses 3.
Why do you look at the clutter in your brother's home and pay no attention to the clutter in your own home?
Oh, come on. Preach it, brother.
And so I think it's so easy for us to say, oh, you have too much stuff, right? Or you have too many commitments. Or you're doing too much. Or, man, you have so many relationships. How do you have time for all of that? Or you're working 3 jobs. What is wrong with you, right? Well, maybe I'm just saying that's not my preference. I don't prefer to own the things that you own. In fact, those things would get in my way. they would be clutter for me, but they're not clutter for thee. And I have to be able to recognize that. And so when I get to the essence of a question like this, yes, I quite often see things, especially in my own home. The closer I am to someone, I see things I'd like to remove from their life. And sometimes I even see like, oh, I can tell that amount of clutter is causing tremendous suffering in their life. My daughter has a friend and her parents are hoarders. And in fact, we don't let her spend time at that house. I mean, traditional like stage 5 hoarders.
Wow.
And we don't let her go over there. We still let her spend time with the kid, but we don't want her spending time in that house.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons that we do that is I see the suffering and how that suffering, that despair can be contagious. But also, if I were to just go to her house and remove all of the things from her home, it'd be easy for me to say, oh, I'm removing the suffering. But in a way, I might actually increase their suffering because now I've added even more uncertainty. Quite often we hoard things, we hold on to things, or we just collect things because it gives us a sense of certainty and even of security, right? And a way to increase that feeling of insecurity is to just go in there and remove all of those items for someone else. And the truth is, it's not my job to police other people's possessions. I can see it. I can even see their suffering. I can have compassion for that suffering because I know I too have suffered quite a bit because of my material possessions. But it is not my role. It is not my duty. It is not my job. It is not my responsibility to declutter those things for them. All right, we're just getting started, y'all. We have an army of callers to talk to. But first, real quick for right here, right now, here's actually two things going on in the life of the Minimalists. The Everything Tour 2024 ends this Friday, July 19th in San Francisco. Now, it's been a sold-out show for about a month now, but we just released our last handful of free tickets. We saved some for y'all, so get them while you can. They're on our website, theminimalists.com/tour. Grab your ticket before they are all gone. You know, this is going to be our biggest event since 2017, 2018-ish.
Yeah?
Yeah. A lot of people are going to be there. We're actually going to be filming it as well. We hope to see you there. theminimalists.com/tour. Bring your smile, bring some hugs. We'll be bringing those as well. Side note, if you can't make it, you can listen to every event from this tour if you subscribe to the True Fan tier on our Patreon. Oh, and one more thing. Big round of applause for our new team member who is here on the couch today. Alyssa Borelli's here. She is our new studio intern, and she'll be helping out here around the studio. Looking forward to working with her. We had dozens of people apply for this position, and some really great people we interviewed. We narrowed it down, I think, to 7 people and then 4 people, and we all had conversations with them, and it was fascinating. What did you really enjoy about our conversation with Alyssa?
One of the things I said about Alyssa is you could literally send her to any company, any organization in the world, and they're going to recognize that she has the it factor and they're going to want to work with her because she just has it, man. She just has the professionalism. She has her act together, man. She's got it. And by the way, we call her AB.
I've been calling her Yinzer because she's from Pittsburgh.
Yeah. But then I played around with the nicknames and I was thinking maybe ABZ. And then I thought A-Beezus. And then it hit me, man. It was like A business. And so I can't not call her A business now. So
let us know in the comments. What do you think? Is it Yinzer? Is it AB? Is it A-Beezy? Is it A business? Alabama, you enjoyed our conversation that we had with Alyssa as well, with AB, with Yinzer.
Yes.
We'll figure it out. But what did you enjoy when we had those conversations with her and we eventually decided together to hire her?
Oh, she was so warm. It was so easy to talk to you. You had this beautiful glowing charisma about you that I looked at and said, that's what I want to feel like every day that I walk into the studio. That's what I want guests that come onto the show to reciprocate as well and just feel so welcome and warm. Yeah. I was just blown away. You're so sweet, honey. Like,
You'll get to meet her on future episodes. I'll tell you what I really loved is I knew she'd work really well with our team, both our in-person team here, worked well with Malabama and me and TK, but also our extended team, whether it's Jeff and Dave and post-production Peter and any of the events that we do. She'll be helping out at our live events. We're bringing Sunday Symposium back soon, so stay tuned for that in Los Angeles. And I can't wait for y'all to meet her as well. Let us know in the comments, what's the best nickname for Yenzer over here? We got so much more to talk about. But first, Malabama, what do you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hello, minimalists. I live in Switzerland and I have an idea for a digital packing party. So I got rid of my smartphone, and this allowed me to declutter my communication. So this is how it goes. I lost all my WhatsApps and all my messages from all my messaging services. And so people couldn't contact me on there anymore. So I didn't receive any messages on there anymore. And people obviously didn't think of texting me. So this allowed me to actively get in touch with only those people who I actually thought of getting in touch with. So it's kind of like the packing party, right? Because at the packing party, you only open the boxes and get the items out that you want or that you need. And this has really helped me thinking of the people who matter most in my life. So yeah, if you don't want to get rid of your smartphone right away, you can either delete your contacts and have a printed list in your cupboard, or even just deleting WhatsApp or any other messaging services where you message with people will help. And then you'll have to actively reach out to the people you want to be in touch with. Highly recommend. Okay, have a good day. Bye.
Fanny, thank you so much for that thoughtful comment. For anyone else who has a listener tip or insight about this episode or any other episode, leave a comment on Patreon or YouTube, or better yet, send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. All right, that's the first 33% of episode 451. We'll see you on Patreon for the full Maximal Edition, which includes answers to a bunch more questions. Questions like, how can I determine whether my opinions are useful or are they just clutter? How would you go about explaining minimalism from scratch to kids? Why do I get so happy when my friends cancel plans? Plus a million more questions and simple living segments over on the Minimalist Private Podcast. We also have an outstanding home tour for one of our listeners this week. Visit patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You also gain access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials so you can test drive our private podcast for 7 days for free. And that is our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.